Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Visual Studio Remote Office Hours. My name is Matt Christensen and I'll be your host for the next hour. And so in this episode, I want to go down memory lane a little bit because we've now been home, working from home, and for almost 6 months actually. I think like in a week, I'm coming up on 6 months, and that means no conferences, no traveling, staying at home. And when I say no conferences, I mean I haven't gone to a conference like physically. There's been plenty of virtual conferences, which has been really cool. But I also kind of miss the days of the actual physical conference you went to and talked to people in the hallways and so on. And one thing when you go to these conferences, or maybe you're even speaking at those conferences, is that there's a lot of preparation that goes into those, especially from the speakers. And so not only is there the presentation, the delivery, but also, of course, all the traveling and everything around it that leads into delivering a good presentation. And so I have Mr. John Galloway with us here today to talk about all the years he's been like professionally doing presentations around the world, and hopefully he's able to give us some insights. Hello, John. Welcome.
Hey, nice to join you.
Yeah, good to see you. Hey, do you mind introducing yourself and like giving a little bit of background to your conference speaking over the years?
Sure. Let me see. Okay, so my name's John. I've been at Microsoft for 10 years now, just over 10 years, and I've been doing kind of conference speaking stuff since, I don't know, 2005-ish, somewhere around there. And I really kind of started just going to user groups, speaking at my local user group and stuff. And then kind of over time, as I went to conferences, I was like, I want to do that. And then kind of as part of being at Microsoft, that's been part of my job. I've done several different jobs at Microsoft, but they've all been related to .NET evangelist kind of stuff. Currently I work on .NET community team, and I work in a group that's like James Montemagno and Jeff Fritz and other folks, doing cool stuff. And then we're in Scott Hanselman's team. So anyhow, that's the current thing. Previous to that, I worked in some different groups, including like one was DX, which was kind of like a developer evangelist team, all up developer evangelist team. I don't know. Let me see. How did I get into, speaking at conferences? A lot of it was just kind of it was something that I would like going to conferences and learning about stuff. And then I learn by sharing, I learn by speaking. And so then when I have to prepare for a conference, that often is a thing that forces me to actually learn something at a deeper level, and also to find out I didn't know it as well as I thought. So like it's always like thinking something is kind of hacking around, looking at docs, getting something to work, and you're like, okay, I got this. And then actually like having to put together a presentation to explain it to someone, you realize like, oh well, I actually am saying this, but I don't know that for sure. Let me go check it out. Or, my demo doesn't work. Why not? Oh, there's this weird edge case where it's not going to work on Hotel VPN, blah, 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 because I don't have the same network connection I did at home or whatever, So that's part of what's kept me doing it over time, is that I love that it forces me to learn things in that way. And then also I love just sharing information, and it's so rewarding to speak to people, and then they'll come up and talk to you. And sometimes they'll come up and say, hey, I learned from a talk you did 3 years ago, and I got a different job, and whatever it is, and that just like is like so cool. So
that's awesome. So does that mean that when you then find those edge cases and stuff, that not only are you able to learn yourself, but will you improve on the code? Like, I don't know what it is that you're demoing, but the thing you're demoing, does that improve as well as you go through and explore those edge cases and the hotel Wi-Fi's and whatnot? Part of it?
Absolutely. Yeah. There's often man, I was just this morning flipping back, looking at some recent trips, and I was speaking in Istanbul about some stuff with gRPC, and I'm like chatting with James Newton King in New Zealand, and I'm like, hey, can I get your slides? And hey, this thing isn't working, and and finding out this stuff of like, okay, there's these edge cases, and definitely in cases where I'll say like, hey, we should fix the docs on this, and I'll ping the team and say like, hey, there's the thing, or just do the pull request myself all the time. I'm just going, even if it's like a little spelling correction or a like little note or something, I love to share that, because otherwise it's just, it goes into my head and I forget it in a week. Right. So I might as well share it out to other people. Another thing that I can think of is just, when I've had the opportunity to give workshops, and I've worked on workshops like with Damian Edwards, and I presented some with you in the past. We did what was it called? Web camps. So we do these web camps, and definitely with those sorts of things too. As you're presenting, you're talking with the other speaker and going like, this is kind of a pain in the neck, and so I'm sure there have been things like, as I work with Damian Edwards and David Fowler and other people on these ASP.NET workshops, and then then they would go and fix the stuff, so that was cool too. So yeah.
So, but a workshop is a completely different beast, right? That's a full day kind of thing. What is a workshop, and how does it differ exactly?
Yeah, so a workshop, and my first, I learned about workshops with these web camps, and it was something I first did right when I started at Microsoft. Someone else in this evangelist team was like, hey, we're doing a workshop, come with me. And we went to India and Germany and London and all. It was my first international speaking trips, and I learned a lot, including how hard it is to speak when you're jet lagged, which is a whole new challenge. But so yeah, with a workshop, there's like, it's definitely hard mode compared to speaking for 1 hour. You can get away with a lot that you don't even know you're getting away with in a 1 hour presentation. You can just talk about the stuff and and not worry about the stuff you don't know. You can't do that for a full day. You also need a lot more preparation, because in a workshop you're actually teaching and people are following along and doing exercises. And it's great, by the way, seeing everyone in the chat. It's great, friends from Finland and just all over the place. So great to see you. But so with these workshops, you definitely need to prepare quite a bit, and so there's it's a different level. So some of them, like we did in ASP.NET Core. Actually, I can share my screen and bring it up, right?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so .NET Core workshop. I'll share one of these that we did here. So share the screen. Okay. So here's an example, right? This ASP.NET Core app workshop. So, this is one that we came up with. This one is a learn by doing one. So it's more focused on, we're building an app and you'll learn some things along the way. Hey, Richard, nice to see you. Yes.
Yeah. Hey, Richard.
Richard is mentioning another thing, and I'll get to that in a second. So, but here's the general thing in this workshop. Here's what we'll build, and then we talk about, here's the stuff. So tons of like writing things up and then refactoring it over time, because people go through and say, well, I'm doing it on a Mac, this doesn't work for me, and then we'll fix the different things up, right? So this, and then a huge thing we learned along the way on this too is to have snapshots of the code at the beginning and end of each little bit, each chapter, each hour-long segment, right? So we say, if you get to, by the end of this chunk, your code should look like this. And so then someone will say, hey, I'm stuck. And we'll say, okay, go open, skip ahead to this next thing. This also is a huge security thing as a speaker, because then you can say like, my demo's not working. Well, this is what it should have looked like. And you can skip over to that, and often it's like, well, I forgot this JSON, I screwed up this one little thing. Right. So,
right. But in order to get there, you have to prepare all this. So you have to have to do a lot of work up front. This seems to be a lot more work than doing like let's say a 1 hour presentation. Even if you're in a keynote, maybe, I don't know, like one of those super duper well rehearsed.
Yeah. So a keynote's a whole different beast. But one thing Richard mentioned in the comments is the energy level that you need for a full day is huge. It's like it's a marathon, and you've got to plan for that also. You need to get a good night's sleep beforehand. You need, like, one tip Hanselman told me before was like energy bars with a lot of protein, like whatever works for you to keep your energy up, but you need that. Partly also because, so like if we look at the schedule for this is 8 hours. But the problem is, in between each of these things, you don't get a break. You actually, because as soon as I finish speaking and I'm like, okay, that was done, now we're setting up for the next session, then someone comes up and says, hey, my code's not working. Can you help me? Like, I can't connect to a database or whatever it is. And then you spend all that time and then you're like, oh shoot, we're 2 minutes late on the next thing, and you're running up. So you don't get those breaks like you thought. Also, people just want to chat and say hi, and that's part of why you're there, right? And lunch too. You don't get a lunch break normally. So this is part of why for a workshop, I always try and present with another presenter, because then you can pass back and forth. Mm-hmm. So another thing you don't think about is your demo code. A lot of the time your demo needs some setup. So usually when I go to give a 1 hour presentation, I've already got a few things open on my desktop. I've got everything set up. I've got backend service running, whatever. You don't get to do that between a workshop session. So that's another place where having another person to trade back and forth with, while they're doing their talk, I'm setting up all my demos. I'm fixing a typo I just saw in the slides. Whatever it is. So
do you have a recent?
I wrote up a blog post, and I can share it out here. But it's how to put together a workshop. I don't know. I'm sure I'll find it. It's well, I'll let me unshare for a second and I'll find it, and then I'll because I actually had someone at Microsoft say, how do I prepare and present a workshop? And I was like, wow, I've been doing this for a few years, and it's all this stuff that's kind of stuck in my head. There's a lot of like little things as I was looking at it. And then I was like, oh yeah, that's right. This is okay. So here we go. Let me throw it back up there. So we're both using, I apologize. I'm jumping in and sharing my screen and stuff because I'm used to the StreamYard thing.
Yeah, good.
Okay. So anyhow, this is a blog post I wrote up on this, and it's all the kind of like lessons learned, things I did wrong, things I would do better in the future, kind of. So one thing is asking questions early. And this is a big deal. This is one of my biggest speaking fails ever, was not asking the right questions early. And the whole thing is like, who am I speaking to? What's the format? What's the level of people going to the presentation? What do they want to get out of it? What's their developer background? And so as an example, I had one like that I mentioned in this post, but one win was I had some people in Los Angeles, and they were like, hey, come speak to us. We need expert level advanced MVC workshop. So I got on a call with them. I found out they had never done MVC before. There was one person on the team that had poked at the docs, and they were basically like thinking of moving from web forms to MVC. Mm-hmm. And so they needed an intro to, and I called it an advanced workshop, but it was an intro talk, right? And so it went great. It was, everyone was super happy. They learned a lot. But if I had gone there with expert level MVC, I would have been screwed. Like, it would have been terrible. So another thing, and I write this up in some detail there, and I cringe about it every time, but one of my first conference, big conference things was I gave a workshop, and it was an MVC boot camp. And so I went there expecting people to have their laptops ready, that, here's a workshop. And the workshop looked like, like this sort of thing, right? Well, it turned out half the people didn't have laptops. Most of the people just wanted to see me talk for 4 hours, and they didn't have the prereqs installed. I didn't have things set up in a way that I could share with people. The conference Wi-Fi was bad. it was just a horror show. And so then partway through, I just realized like, this isn't working. And I was just kind of like, all right, let's roll it back here. What I just did kind of show of hands. What do you want to learn out of this? What's your expertise level? What do you, and we just wrote stuff down and we just kind of rolled back and just did what they wanted, So
does that mean that all your planning, all the stuff that you had planned, you had to like scrap it and do something completely custom?
Completely scrap it. Yeah. I mean, I wrote some code on the fly. I used some of my slides when they came up, but I didn't stick to this workshop that wasn't working. Now, in a conference, 1 hour conference talk, you could just muddle through and it would be like a bad talk, but whatever. But for hours and hours, we're not going to do that.
Yeah, you really need to know your area, right? You really need, so you can be spontaneous and go off tangents and whatnot, and make sure it works for everybody. So you must be somewhat of an expert in your field then.
Yeah. And so you need to be honest, right? So if you're not an expert, that's okay too. If that's expectation and that's how you're selling yourself. So don't pretend to be an expert in something you're not in.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like I will tell people, like, for instance, I've given some talks lately on Project Tie. I love Project Tie. I've read just about everything and seen just about everything published on it. So I have spent time on it.
Can you tell us?
I'm not a Kubernetes expert. I'm not a, Docker expert. I haven't shipped microservice-based stuff in the industry. Like, and so I've got code that works on my machine and I know what I know and I know there's stuff I don't know. So when I give these talks, I'll tell people like, hey, I'm new to Tie. Tie's kind of new on, as a technology thing anyhow, but here's what I've learned so far. And let me share what I've learned along the way and how it's helped me out. And I'll share a few like things I've run into, some problems I've hit and stuff. And, and then if people ask a question, I'll say, I don't know. That's a great, and sometimes if you got time, let's look in the docs. And I think that's an important thing too, is teaching people how to find out more. So for instance, I love to show people the docs. I'll show people like, hey, here's how I learned about this in the docs. And I really like this part where they call this thing out here, this note, if you don't follow this, it'll bite you,
Yeah.
Another thing that reminds me of is I like to use demos that are in the docs. It's not as exciting. It's not always like a brand new here's a cool demo that I wrote because I'm, showing off a bit sometimes. It's more of a, here's a published sample by the team. And, here's this cool thing. You can switch this thing on. They don't do that by default. Here's this cool thing we can add on to it. But I like to use published samples by teams that are going to keep updating it, that have, done some testing on it. Because otherwise, if it's always just code that I've written, I'll push it to GitHub, but I'm not going to keep maintaining it for 2 years,
Yeah, right.
So, yeah.
That's a good point. And so is all of this true as well for the conference presentation, or is this a specific thing for workshops?
For a conference presentation, it varies a bit. And this goes to the know your audience and know the scenario and stuff like that. So for a lot of conferences, I still use the kind of lessons learned. I like to focus on, in an hour, what do I want them to remember a week from now? What do I want them to actually take away from this? Because if you think about it, in a conference, people are just barraged by a bunch of presentations one after another. And then at the end of a day, what do you really remember from it? And so I think I like to, I want it to be entertaining. I want it to show some cool stuff that gets you excited about the technology. I want you to learn more. And then I have just a few key points of it. What is this technology used for? What do I do if I get stuck? What are the gotchas? Those sorts of things. And then the demos are it's definitely to keep interest or to illustrate a point. I honestly don't like typing a bunch of code on stage, even if it's something I know really well, because it's boring watching someone type. It often doesn't really, it's a waste of time, So I like to tour through code I've written, maybe write just a little bit of code in a certain area. And I'll say for instance, a demo I did recently on Project Pi, I showed using Zipkin, and I wrote 3 lines of code, to enable this thing. And I'm not going to screw up typing 3 lines of code. And it actually does illustrate, like, here's how the configuration works. Mm-hmm. But besides that, and honestly, I know some people use snippets and it's great, but a lot of the time just copying and pasting snippets in doesn't teach a lot unless you're explaining, like, okay, here's how the code looked before, here's how the code looks afterwards, and here's what we want to learn from it. Like, here's the magic bits, here's the, this flag enables this or this thing. Mm-hmm. But if it's just kind of like file new, here's a file new project, now let's drop in 20 snippets and run it, yay, we did it. They're like, I think it's important to step back and say, what are we learning from this? And again, like, what do I want them to remember at the end of the day? What was good about that talk? And bring away from something more from it than I went to a talk and it was cool.
So you're mentioning you're doing these key messages that you want to make sure comes across, and that you enable the audience to know how to learn more.
Yeah.
Does that mean that you start when you're, let's say that you have to do a presentation somewhere, and okay, I have never done this before, I'm gonna start from clean slate. Do you start by figuring out what your messaging is, and then figure out, okay, what demos can I then do that illustrates those messages in the best way? Is that how to go about it?
Yeah, I think so. And to be honest, it's now something I've done for years, and sometimes I don't follow the process that I really should have, but I think the better presentations I do are that. They're ones where it's kind of like or it evolves into that. Like, I'll start with, here's some slides, here's some key points, here's some, here's this feature, and here's a demo that illustrates it. And then later I'll go through and I'll think, like, this demo is taking a ton of time and it doesn't really explain anything. Why don't I just show the finished code here? But here's and so it does evolve into that. And the key points for me a lot of the time are like, why do I care? What are the 2 or 3 features that I really need to know about? What are the gotchas? And then how do I learn more? Those are kind of most talks these days that I give end up with that.
Right. And I think it's really important to stress the whole learn more aspect. Yeah. So I've been dealing a lot with Visual Studio extensibility, and that's kind of a hard thing to get started into. There's a lot of weirdness to understand. Mm-hmm. But when people ask, like, how do I get started? I always tell them, learn enough so that you know how to search for help, so that you know what to search for. You need to know what the words are, the interface names, and how to find them, such that you can now do a GitHub search or a Google search and get what you need.
That's such a key point. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So because a lot of the time the information's out there, but you don't know the keywords to look for, right? So like lately Kubernetes wasn't working for me. And I'm like, Kubernetes doesn't work, ? Like, that's not going to help. And then later I'm like, oh, my kubelet, whatever was, or like, I'm using the wrong VM backend when I'm running Minikube and whatever. Now I know the keyword, and boom, 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 and it pops right up on Google, right? But it's that knowing how to search. And then also the gotchas thing, I think, is important, like explaining. And again, that's hey, you can get pretty far with File New Project. You can run this sample, and then if it doesn't work, it's because your database is down, or it's, here's how to troubleshoot the problem. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think Code with Sean here is saying pretty much the same thing. One of the greatest things we can teach is what challenges we come across. Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of what makes can make for a good talk. And I'm thinking of talks that I've enjoyed watching too, is a story, right? So not just here's some code, here's an interface or whatever, but here's a story of how I learned or solved a problem. Here's a story of how, whatever it is, here's how we did something. Like, I've showed off code that we use behind the scenes running like .NET Conf, and then it's like, here's how we were stuck. And then we use it using caching and an Azure function that refreshed this thing in the back end. And I think that makes it more memorable. It triggers something in your head.
And so when you say story, you mean let's say you have an hour presentation. the story could be, we're going to put on a .NET Conf. Here are all the things we ran into of issues and how we solved them. And so you have the storyline is not sort of a fictional story. That's not what it means. It means that there's a red line between all the demos and all the talking points and the messaging throughout the presentation. Is that right?
So that would be wonderful. I don't think I've actually done that in recent memory. A lot of the time I was honestly thinking of is just here's a quick story for this one demo. I do love that. And what you're talking about there, I think fits especially for a keynote. And you mentioned keynotes earlier, and that's one other talk that is another kind of challenge, right? So with that, if you're giving demos, it's sometimes hard to work demos in the same way. Like in a talk, I can fill time in a good way with demos. I can spend time showing off code. I can, I'm comfortable with that. With a keynote, you need a motivational message, you need entertainment, you need like a big picture sort of thing. And those are another interesting challenge. And I think it's people don't realize how much time goes into these talks. Like I mentioned, those workshops, I mean, preparing a workshop is dozens of hours. It's weeks of work. Preparing a talk, even if it's something well, is days. And preparing a keynote is like every waking moment for the months before it, like, oh, that should go, oh wait, you know what I mean? It's more of like, what's the story I'm telling, and what's the, and so I think a lot of time you'll see, like, I mean, some people just have this natural gift where they can just get up and talk. I don't have that. And I think a lot of people, are spending a lot of time preparing, and it seems effortless and it seems like they're just talking, but they really have spent a lot of time thinking of this story, right?
Yeah, so, right. So whether the story is like you have multiple stories within your presentation, or if it's one continuous red line through, do you ever find now that when you're then traveling around the world, does the same stories work or resonate, whether you're in, your home in San Diego, or you're like at a user group, let's say, or you're doing a big conference in Germany or Singapore or something like that?
Yeah. Yes and no. I mean, so we actually do have a ton in common as developers. And I think those common things that we share, like everyone's spent time troubleshooting an API not working, and it was because the database was down and whatever, or they've made a typo and they can't fix it and they realize they're editing the wrong file, those sorts of things, right? So we definitely do share a lot there. It is important to understand and appreciate the culture. And I love that about traveling. And I always, want to get there a day ahead of time anyways. It's funny, Duolingo just popped up with my daily reminder. So I like trying to learn the languages as much as I can. And, really
what are you learning now?
What's that?
Which language are you learning now?
I have been working on Chinese and Arabic. I've played with several other languages. My brain does not work with like most European languages. I can't get the genders straight in my head. Chinese is actually really logical. It was like it was written by a programmer. There's no tenses, there's no conjugation, there's no like, so you just say like, even dates are super simple. So if you want to say March 3rd, 2013, you say 2013 year, 3 month, 3 day. Like it's just all, and like to say anything past tense, you say the verb and then you say le after it. And it's like works. I mean, I'm sure there's exceptions, but at least as far as Duolingo has taken me, it always works, right? And so like you don't have to worry about masculine and feminine. What is it, a table or a doorknob? Is it masculine or like none of that? So anyhow, it's working for me.
Right.
So, but yeah, so your original thing you're asking of does do stories work around the world? And one thing that I had to learn was that people culturally respond differently. So like whereas, parts of the US, people will just shout something out in the middle. Like I gave a workshop and it was in Germany and I told some sort of joke and everyone just stared at me. And I was like, they're so mad. I don't know what I did, and then later people came up and joked with me afterwards. I just didn't realize it was like, culturally people were not going to, for this one. And it's different parts of different countries. Right. And also at the end of this was in a workshop, everyone started tapping their pencil on the desk, which you could explain, but that's a common thing in Germany after a lecture. And it's like an applauding, right? I guess.
I don't know. I'm not familiar with that thing.
Yeah, it was after I was like, what am I fired or what are you doing with the pencils?
So it's instead of clapping, you tap your pencil?
People tap their pencils. So, and like, for instance, India, people do this kind of head bob that looks like they're if you're not familiar with it, it looks like they're shaking their head no. And so I would be saying something and everyone was shaking their head no. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure I'm right here. So, but again, a lot of this is just understanding and appreciating the cultures. There's a website, I think it's either Wiki Travel or Wiki Voyage. One was a fork of the other. And I love going and reading about, and sometimes it's even during my travel tour from the place. And I'll just read about and understand the culture, and then of course talk to people when I get there. But
do you feel like, when you are looking at the conference calendar and you want to, apply to give a talk at some conference somewhere, do you sometimes say, oh, I've never been to that country, I want to apply for like a conference over there to check it out? How much does that play into your conference calendar?
Yeah, actually a good amount. And part of it is because especially recently, I've been trying to travel places that people don't go to as much. Like, so say for instance, I feel like with a decent amount of Microsoft conferences, there's 20 Microsoft people at the same conference, right? And then there'll be other, like I went on this short tour at the end of last year. I went to Istanbul and I went to Moscow, and in Istanbul, I was the only Microsoft person. And in Moscow, there were a few, like there was one engineer, but there were no other like PMs on the .NET team, right? And so I think that it's worthwhile to do that. I also just love traveling, meeting new people, experiencing new things, and eating the local food and all that. So definitely, like given an option to go somewhere I've never been, I'll lean towards that.
I tend to do the same thing. I used to travel a lot more. Of course, now I don't travel at all, but but there was a different time in my life where I traveled probably once a month, and I think you probably done even more. And so one thing is you want to go to a country that you may haven't been to before, or you have and you just really liked it, or for whatever reason it might be. Do you find yourself like saying, "Oh, that flight is going to be really long. That's on the opposite side of the planet," or I have to do like, it's going to take me like 3 different connections to get there. Does that play into it as well? Like, how convenient is it?
Honestly, I don't mind travel. I was in the Navy before I was a programmer, and the travel there is very uncomfortable. And so, it's I feel like it's worth the trade-off. So, and I definitely I try to book my own flights. I know what's going to be comfortable and work well. I try not to get morning flights. I try to make sure I have enough time for any transfers and so I do my best to try and plan up front so that my travel is going to be as comfortable as possible. I do, definitely try to get Wi-Fi on a plane, get power on a plane. I have battery that'll work. I don't mind working on a plane, and I can sleep on a plane. So I don't really mind. Personally, I don't mind that. I feel like I'm kind of lucky that way, because I know some people that just can't sleep on planes, and I don't know how to help you, but
that's like me. I can't sleep on a plane, and I can't work on a plane either. Like a laptop on that little table that you've got. I can't do it. It's too crammed in, and you have to sit with your arms super tight to your body. Right? It's,
I know.
I'm very uncomfortable.
So you can't, I mean, It's true. And sometimes you're just stuck. I do try and fly on the same airline, did try to fly in the same, like network airlines. So like partner airlines. And when you do that, then if you can get status, then you can select your seat. And I'd try and get one in a front row or an exit row, so that I would at least not have the seat, recline right back into me.
Yeah, and maybe a little bit extra leg room, so
yeah,
more room for the laptop there.
Which brings up a funny story. One of my first keynotes, I think it may be my first keynote. I was speaking in Denmark, I forget, and I was flying. Oh man! So I had one long flight, and it took me most of, it was the majority of the flight, and I had my talk mostly ready, but I had also planned on, hey, I'm going to be on this long flight, and I'll work on my slides. I'll finalize some stuff that I'm planning. Well, I got on the flight, and I had switched my seat, and the map of the plane seats was not accurate, and so I was not in a front row that I thought I was. The person in front of me reclined their seat all the way back, and I was like, I could not work on my laptop. And I was like, I'm giving a talk tomorrow morning, which again is a no-no. Like I now always try and plan, like more time. So anyways, at the time, all Microsoft employees had just been given the Surface RT. Do you remember the original Surface? Yes. And it didn't do much, but it did run PowerPoint. And so I copied my slides off my laptop onto the Surface, and then using the touch screen, because I couldn't really type, but using the touch, I was able to make, and I mean, I seriously had like a few hours worth of edits because I had some diagrams that I felt were really important, some visual stuff. And so I was able to pull it together using that.
So you must be traveling then so that was, you just copied it onto a memory stick or something like that and transferred it?
Yeah. Yeah.
So what kind of gear do you travel with? Like, it sounds like you've multiple laptops, right? Or a Surface RT maybe in your laptop.
Yeah.
What
so it depends. I usually do try and travel with two laptops. So lately I'm focused on .NET development on Mac. And so I have a MacBook, and then I have a Surface laptop, and I take both of those with me. And 99% of the time you don't really need two laptops, but laptops are small enough now. Mm-hmm. And I feel like my entire job for the 2 days a week, whatever, is traveling and speaking at a conference. And so if I blow the talk because my laptop's not working or whatever, that's the entire point, right? And so I have occasionally had things where one laptop's not working or something's weird on Windows and I need to show it on my Mac or vice versa. And so having two laptops has saved my butt. One of the best examples was I was speaking during a keynote in Moscow. I had a MacBook Air with me, and this was during the time when .NET Core was new. And one of the things was it works on a Mac, and you get out your MacBook and you'd show that it works on a Mac, and then you put the MacBook away. And that's about all we ever did, right? We'd just say like, it technically works on a Mac, but we would not actually do much more than that. But I always had a MacBook Air with me, and I was speaking in a keynote, and I was giving a demo with Azure and .NET Core, and I was deploying an Azure function and doing all this stuff. And the day before, I was running through my keynote. It was a section of the keynote. It was maybe 10, 15 minutes of the keynote, and I was just rehearsing it, and I knocked over my coffee cup on my laptop, and it was a Windows laptop, and it had all the demos, had everything set. And I was like, oh no, I'm sure most of us have spilled some amount of liquid onto a laptop at some point in the past. This was like a little more than I was comfortable with. I very quickly turned it upside down, put towels on it, blah, 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 dry it out. Okay, turn it on. Oh, it's actually working. This is cool. I'm typing stuff and blah, blah, blah. And after a while, I'm like, pretty sure I pressed the N key, and the N key did not work. And then I'm like, oh shoot. I'm like, well, I have to type. This was in the days where you'd do DNX and DN everything. Oh, yeah. And my N key did not work. And then I was like, oh no, and I'm like, well, I could remap the key. And as I'm like playing with that, another key doesn't work. And slowly the entire keyboard did not work. And I'm in Moscow like in a hotel, I'm like, I don't know even if this laptop is, so anyhow, I got out my MacBook Air and I rewrote my whole presentation, and I was supposed to be leaving to like get a train to go do my rehearsal that evening. And I like rewrote the whole thing to work on a MacBook. And it actually was a better presentation because I was able to legitimately show I'm doing all this stuff on my MacBook. Yeah. And it was a whole .NET and deploy and everything. So
yeah. But if you've had like a separate USB keyboard or something, you'd been fine. Is that right?
Well, that's another better solution, maybe. Yeah, you're right.
You travel with a keyboard,
or maybe I should not bring two. But I do like. There's enough. I'm giving most of my presentations on Mac these days, but there's enough stuff where it's nice having a Windows machine too, and it's small enough. And yeah, but you're right. That is maybe a better solution. Just bring a keyboard.
It used to be a thing to, some conference places they didn't have all the different ways you could connect your to the big screen in the room. Like some had display port, some had VGA, some had HDMI or mini HDMI, and so on. So do you travel still like with a bunch of dongles? Is that still a problem actually with those multiple things? Or
it's much less of a problem. It still is a problem, and over time I've evolved. I have one magic dongle that is it plugs into, so it works with my MacBook, or excuse me, it works with my Windows machine, but it has three outputs. It has has DVI, it has DisplayPort, and has a HDMI. And so that one like always works on all the stuff. I do have a small bag. I don't have 90 dongles, but I have like my trusty ones that, so I have the network adapter one. I have a couple of like display things. And honestly, a lot of what I use them for nowadays is not connecting to the projector, because most projectors are modern and have HDMI in, but is connecting to the hotel room TV so that I can not watch stupid TV.
That's funny. Okay. Yeah. So dongles for Ethernet for the projectors or hotel TVs. Yeah. And it sounds like a memory stick is also good.
Definitely a lot of memory sticks.
And if you can, if it's convenient, if it's possible, bring two laptops. But hang on, doesn't that then mean you have to in advance set up the demo and everything on both laptops so you can switch quickly?
So I put most of my presentations, my slides and stuff, I put those into OneDrive. And so I have most of that stuff synced on OneDrive. I don't, Sean mentions in the thing, some projectors are VGA only, and I do have that backup adapter. If I have to dig out VGA, I've got it covered. But yeah, so I'll have my slides in OneDrive. I have those USB sticks, so I can just copy back and forth. I don't normally switch laptops for my demos. Normally I'll plan like this thing, I'm giving this whole presentation on the MacBook, or I'm giving 90%, I'm just showing this one thing. But it's actually PowerPoint copies over. Most of everything's cross-platform these days. And so it's not as big of a thing as you'd think. But definitely having stuff in OneDrive has also kind of saved me at times. Like I'll have a good example is I'll have something where I'll be thinking like, oh shoot, I should show this demo that I showed 2 years ago, and it's still in my OneDrive. So
yeah. So you were mentioning like it has something that has saved you in the past. Does that mean that you've run into like have you ever like had a presentation somewhere that just for some reason just completely bombed and you had no idea why in advance, or like?
Oh man! Well, the one that I mentioned earlier was that workshop that was just terrible. I've had some that like go better or worse. I have definitely had like some of my major like coding demos, and then it turns out like I lost Wi-Fi partway through or something. There's not like a huge thing that comes up, and honestly, I think a lot of that is because I'm a very like. I plan ahead so that stuff is not going to crash and burn too bad. So the worst that happens is my code doesn't work, and then I switch over to here's the working code. I'll give you one example actually that does come to mind. One of my first talks was at a user group, and it was a lightning talk. I had 10 minutes to show all this cool stuff off. And I had it all prepped on my laptop. I had my slides, I had like 9 demos, I had everything, and it was prepped so that, and I practiced it so I could just rip through all this stuff. I plugged it into the projector, and Windows blue screened. And then I was like, well, shoot, because number one, rebooting is using up a chunk of my time. And all this stuff that I had planned is now gone. So,
Yeah.
I definitely don't plan on plan for everything going wrong. I can always still show my slides. I can show my working code, and I can talk about it, and then, plan for the best, but expect something bad's going to happen.
And I guess, sometimes what happens that goes wrong, it has nothing to do with you. It could be the projector, right? Or something in the room or the AV equipment or something. I remember.
Absolutely. Sean's mentioning like a talk on OAuth and, like the router not working,
Yep.
And so definitely internet access is a problem. Like conferences, even conferences with good Wi-Fi, still like stuff can happen. I was at one talk, I was at a conference where all the presenters were having trouble with the internet, and the conference was saying like, what's going on? We paid for really good. And it turned out somebody was running one of these like carbonite things that backs up your laptop.
Yep.
And they were backing up their entire laptop to the cloud, whatever, 200 gigabytes over the conference Wi-Fi. And so everybody was yeah. And that even comes to like, I don't plan on having internet access for stuff. So like if I'm depending on an API and I'm not sure the API is going to be there, you just download the output as a JSON file or something, and you can, you can back up to that if you need to.
That's a good point. Like stub out all those internet calls so that you can be completely offline.
Yep.
I think that has gotten a little bit better over the years. Like most places now have a dedicated like hardwire for the speaker that's a different network than the audience.
Yeah.
Is that your experience as well?
Yeah, it definitely. And, as I was thinking about this ahead of time, a lot of the tips and things that I did 10, 15 years ago don't really apply anymore. Like I used to have a big bag of dongles, and I don't really need that as much, and I used to obsess about keeping all my laptops charged, and they actually like the battery life is really good now, and I used to print out all my maps. I would on TripIt, I would have everything planned and all that. And now like I actually have Wi-Fi on most flights. I have Wi-Fi. I have roaming access to internet, with T-Mobile. They have a good roaming plan like to any country just about. And so a lot of those things have gotten a lot simpler.
Yeah.
I used to like spend all this time, and I still do have checklists. I have a checklist in OneNote, and then I've recently moved it over to the To-Do app, but it's it's got all the sub things, and it's like I'll just copy it over because there's the obvious things like passport and like your laptops and stuff, but then there's also the like, a charger for my watch, or some of those things where it's like you want to have and like if I'm packing the morning of or something, I actually do need socks, so that's run down the list.
That brings up a funny point. I've seen like, especially we do these big Microsoft conferences, right? Build, Ignite, PDC, Mix, like whatever they've been called over the years. And I've noticed a couple of differences. Some people, they travel extremely light. Like they have everything in a backpack. And then they're good for like 4 days. That includes their laptops, their clothing, all of it. Well, then other people, they have a backpack, and then they have a full roller bag as well.
Yeah.
And so for the same amount of time away. So can you tell about like, what is your philosophy here for packing?
Yeah. So, and this actually reminds me of when we did a webcam together in Germany, and I had a roller bag and a backpack, and you had a backpack, and it was for 2 cities and like 4 days. So yeah. And I was like, how do you do, but I don't like to overpack, but I do like to, I'd rather be safe than sorry for a lot of stuff. So I almost always bring a roller bag. It's one that fits in the overhead on an airplane. It's the one I've got is Away is the company that makes it. And it has like a slot for a battery, and it's like it's a hard shell kind of or it's a hard plastic outside. So anyhow, that's and actually it's it's sitting in my office, kind of sad right now, but it's got a bag of toiletries. It's got some of my dongles and stuff I only use when I travel. So it's already kind of pre-packed, ready to go someday again. And then I used to bring a big backpack, and actually now, let me grab it. I have a bag. It's like a messenger bag style. No. So my wife actually sewed it. She made it out of sail fabric. And it's just big enough for 2 laptops, and it's got my, like just my plain stuff. So this slides right under a seat, and it's pretty, lightweight and stuff. So
how do you find those? How do you find those messenger bags? I used to have a messenger bag, and then when I traveled with it, sometimes you have to walk like these long aisles and big airports and whatnot.
Yeah,
and because it's hanging on the side, it kind of hurt my back a little bit over time.
I
ended up doing a backpack, but now for work, I'm back to a messenger because I don't really walk that much, I guess, with my bag anymore.
Right.
But if I go to a conference, I would definitely do a backpack from that. But you're saying that's not a problem. Maybe it's the lighter laptops these days.
Yeah, it's laptops are super small now. And I used to travel with a Lenovo W520, and that thing was huge. And then I had a MacBook Air, which was tiny, but still, and that Lenovo thing and the power brick itself was a brick, and that thing was huge.
That was over 10 pounds total.
Yeah.
For that.
And I one time had to run for two different flight connections in the same day with that backpack full of all this stuff. And after that conference was over, I was like, I gotta downsize this stuff. Like there was stuff in my backpack that was like, I haven't used this like ever, or like I'm not going to read a book on a plane. Like I'm an audiobook person. I don't need to bring a book with me, and so like just downsizing my backpack was definitely helped me out.
Yeah. Have you ever looked at those type of bags that have like a dedicated laptop roll that you can take them through security easily? I forget what they're called, but they're like TSA approved or something.
Yeah, I had a backpack like that, and it didn't help me. The TSA people, I don't think that enough people were using them, at least at the time. The TSA people were like, just take your bag out, or take your laptop out. And I, especially like with my messenger bag, I can pop my 2 laptops. Like I've gotten pretty quick at getting through the security, right? So I pop my stuff out, and I don't travel with any liquids so I don't need to get anything out of my suitcase usually. And so it's just I run through,
Yeah.
I've had, occasions. I was at a conference once, and they gave away a goodie bag with different like swag stuff from a thing at a vendor party. And I'm going through the airport security, and they freaked out. And I'm like, what? Like I've got nothing. And then it turned out that one of the things that one of the vendors had given away was a knife. And it was a little folding knife with a USB key. But it was still a knife, and they apparently don't like those on airplanes. So,
oh wow, yeah, I have a similar one. I was at a place, and they gave away like a corkscrew, for wine bottles, and the spiral screw thing had kind of gone loose. So now it was just this metal, wiry spiral.
Yeah,
and it had wedged itself sort of deep down in my bag under some other stuff that's in the bag itself, and I had no idea that they found this. This was and so I got this thing, and I think it was like several weeks later that I then traveled with it, not realizing it was in the bag, right? And of course they found it in the X-ray, and I couldn't explain it. I had no idea what they were talking about.
Yeah. The same thing. I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. And the guy's like, you have a weapon in your bag. Can you tell us about it? And I'm like, no.
Right.
Yeah. So Electric Havoc's mentioning in Twitch, with pre-check, you don't have to remove items. And that's true in the US, but it's not like always true. Even like sometimes pre-check's closed, sometimes, but also for international travel that goes away.
Yeah. Are you a pre-check? Do you have that?
I almost always have pre-check because I got global entry. Okay. Yeah.
Is that a US program, or is that the whole world?
It is a US program. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I guess it's called TSA pre-check, right? So it is a US
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
So you don't need it if you're traveling from 2 other countries. That doesn't include the US.
It's still great to have, and I love, whenever I've got the TSA pre, it's a shorter line. Although over time now it's not quite as short. It was for a while, it was very few people had TSA pre, and it was like right on the plane. And
I feel like every other time I fly, they put TSA pre on my boarding pass for I don't know what reason. Maybe because I travel with little kids or something. I don't know.
Yeah, over time they've kind of ratcheted down what is required. And so again, it's not like the super exclusive club anymore. I do allow a lot of time. I always try and get to the airport like 2 hours early, and I don't mind waiting in an airport. I can get work done there. I don't want to run through an airport. I don't want to miss a flight. And it goes back to that, like, if my job is going and speaking at this conference, I'm not going to miss a flight. Like, it's not worth, being late. And it's just running and getting on a plane all sweaty and stuff is no fun.
I have missed planes flying out of a conference, but never into one.
Same. I had, and the one I was mentioning before, where I was running with the W520 and the huge power brick and all that, I was actually leaving NDC Oslo at like 4:30 in the morning. And I had to get a train to the airport, and I missed the train, and then everything went wrong from there. And I was actually flying from this conference to vacation, which was a cruise leaving out of Alaska. And there was like one flight. So basically I had to get the flight or I would miss the cruise with my parents. And so I was running as fast as I could. I made it, but the bag slowly worked itself open. It was that TSA pre with the special zipper, and everything slid all over the floor. And I'm like, not now. And I'm scooping everything into the bag and stuff. Yeah.
Man.
Yeah.
All right. So we are like a couple of minutes here to the end. Do you have like a good travel tip that we haven't talked about? What is the sort of the number one travel tip to give conference speakers?
I think the number one thing is like plan ahead. Definitely sharing tips with friends. Like at any conference, you get enough speakers sitting around and they'll swap travel tips for hours. But planning ahead so that you're not like making it up as you go it definitely helps. So I use all these tools. Like I have a checklist, a packing checklist. I have my slides and everything is in my OneDrive. I use WikiVoyage to look up where I'm going and what the public travel transport is and all that kind of stuff. So, but the main thing is like, it's the balance of plan ahead and be ready to go with whatever happens, Yeah.
So, those are some great tips. I feel like everyone has their own travel tips, right? You
got to go with what works for you. Yeah.
But it's also one of those things where I think someone like you that actually has been traveling probably more than most of the rest of us, right? Is that your perspective is probably a little bit more interesting because I feel like I'm a very good traveler. I know how to get through security easily. And so maybe I tune those tips out because no, I know how to do it, but I probably don't is my thinking.
Yeah, it is interesting. Like I just, I've had some things where like swapping stories with other travelers, conference speakers, and they'll say, "Oh, have you checked out this thing?" Or like they were some of the people that convinced me, like, you got to get global entry because then you'll get TSA pre on every flight, like all this stuff. So swapping all the tips is fun too.
So last question here. We got 30 seconds left. You mentioned public transportation. I think it was Hanselman that talked to me about that the first time, that he always takes local transportation from the airport to his hotel to kind of get that experience of traveling, and it's cheaper, right?
Yeah.
Do you do the same?
It varies. I try to, but I don't always. Sometimes the public transportation is like, I've been flying on a long flight. I just landed in Istanbul. I'm not going to try and figure out the subway, so I do definitely in like throughout Europe, and for the most part it works. I did have one time I found out trains don't run on Sunday in a lot of Germany. And so I was sitting and I ended up doing a very long walk, but for the most part, I do try and take public transport. And the same, you do like start to get a feel for where you're at. And most places have pretty good transportation. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, John, time is up. Thank you so much for joining me this week.
This was great and brings back some memories of some fun travel, and I'm looking forward to when I can do that again.
Yeah, this was the nostalgic episode, I think, so far.
Yep.
We're all looking forward to the day where we can experience this again. Also, as an attendee, I kind of miss being an attendee at conferences, not just speaking.
Same.
Yeah.
Same. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, and to all the viewers out there, join me again next week. Same time, same place. Mondays, every Monday at 11 a.m. Pacific time. So see you then. Bye.